Look like Amber Cox has leaked some information to Fever insiders, letting them know the plans for the roster for the 2026 season.
Sophie Cunningham and Kelsey Mitchell just walked away from the Indiana Fever, and the front office is absolutely scrambling. These two players were supposed to be key pieces in building a championship team around Caitlin Clark, but now they're gone, leaving GM Amber Cox with a roster that looks more like Swiss cheese than a contender. But here's where it gets really wild. This wasn't some quiet professional departure. Mitchell posted one of the most cryptic Instagram messages in WNBA history right after the news broke. She wrote about grief, survival mode, and ended it with 0 gone, her jersey number. That's not exactly the kind of farewell message you send when you're happy with how things ended.
Basically, Amber Cox called up Adam Sandler in the movie Hustle and said, "Hey, we need some scouts overseas." Whew.
Cunningham's exit was equally dramatic. The veteran shooter, who was supposed to provide that reliable three-point threat alongside Clark, decided she'd rather test free agency than stick around for what could be the most important season in Fever history. Not only that, but sources close to the team say she was frustrated with her role and playing time during crucial stretches last season. The timing couldn't be worse for Indiana. They're sitting with only 3 players officially under contract for 2026: Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Nalissa Smith. That's it.
So Amber Cox ended up getting the question asked to her. With all the things going on with the CBA, you're sitting in the dark. How do they prepare? How do you prepare specifically for off-season events they don't have information on, right? Because they are in the dark. They don't know what's going to happen. We don't even know if 2026 is going to be a year of WNBA.
The rest of the roster just evaporated, and now Cox has to rebuild an entire team around her 2 superstars with the WNBA's CBA negotiations hanging over everything. Let's take a moment to rewind to understand how we got here. Mitchell had a breakout season when Clark was injured, proving she could be a legitimate scoring threat and team leader. She averaged career-high numbers and looked comfortable being the primary option. But once Clark returned, Mitchell got pushed back into a secondary role, and apparently she didn't appreciate the demotion.
And I think she was just saying how Kelsey Mitchell is their #1 priority, same as this year, right? In my opinion, man, I think the main thing that they need to focus on after getting your core back, I think you need to focus on a stretch 4 or a stretch 5. If you could get 2 of them, that would be grand. But a defensive stretch 4, stretch 5, that would be perfect.
Cunningham's situation was different, but equally messy. The sharpshooter came to Indiana expecting to be a crucial piece in their offensive system. Instead, she found herself battling for minutes and watching from the bench during key moments. But here's the twist. Both players were actually performing well when they got their chances, which makes their departures even more shocking. The Fever's front office knew this was a possibility. Cox had made re-signing Mitchell the team's absolute top priority, but apparently that wasn't enough. Mitchell tested the market and found better opportunities elsewhere, leaving Indiana without their second leading scorer from last season. Now here's what makes this absolutely devastating. The Fever were supposed to be moving from development mode into championship contention. Clark and Boston are young superstars ready to win now, but you can't build a title team with just 3 players under contract. Cox went from planning an aggressive offseason to playing damage control, and the whole league is watching to see if she can pull this rebuild off. The domino effect from these departures is already being felt throughout the organization, and it's about to get much worse. GM Amber Cox is now facing the most challenging offseason in franchise history, and she's basically building a championship roster from scratch. The departures of Cunningham and Mitchell left massive holes that go way beyond just replacing 2 players. They've completely disrupted the team's chemistry and strategic planning. But what happened next was even more shocking. Cox had to admit publicly that the Fever over-relied on their young stars, especially Clark and Boston. She confessed that running everything through just 2 players exposed their lack of depth. And now that weakness has been brutally exposed with half the roster walking away. The CBA negotiations are making everything 10 times worse. Nobody knows what the salary structure will look like next season, and the core years rule that lets teams lock down players with supermax contracts might disappear entirely. Cox is trying to plan for free agency when she doesn't even know what the rules will be. Here's where things get absolutely insane. Mitchell's departure wasn't just about money or playing time. Sources reveal she was frustrated with the team's offensive system and felt like her role would always be limited as long as Clark was the primary ball handler. She wanted to lead her own team, not play second fiddle to a rookie sensation. Cunningham's exit was equally telling about the team's internal problems. The veteran was promised a significant role in their championship push, but instead found herself fighting for minutes with younger players. Not only that, but she reportedly felt disconnected from the coaching staff's vision and didn't see how she fit into their long-term plans.
Basically, Amber Cox came back and said, I think we control the controllables, right? You start prepping for, obviously, the college season, for what's going on internationally, planning out our scouting, both domestically and internationally. Whew.
Cox is now scrambling to find replacements, and the options aren't pretty. The free agent market is thin, especially for players who can immediately step in and contribute at a championship level. She's been forced to expand her search internationally, looking at European and Asian leagues for veterans who can shoot and defend. Let's be completely honest here. This is a disaster for a team that was supposed to be ready to contend. The Fever sold fans on the idea that they were building something special around Clark, but losing two key rotation players suggests there were serious problems behind the scenes that nobody saw coming. The coaching staff is also feeling the pressure. Head coach Stephanie White's diplomatic comments about taking things one day at a time sound more like someone trying to keep her job than a coach confident about her roster. But here's the really concerning part. If the Fever don't win next season with Clark and Boston under contract, there won't be any more excuses. Cox is trying to put a positive spin on the situation, talking about controlling what they can control and preparing for multiple scenarios. But the reality is that she's now hunting for players who can immediately contribute to a championship team, and those players don't grow on trees. The front office is working overtime to identify targets, but they're competing against teams with more established rosters and clearer paths to success. Caitlin Clark is now sitting at the center of this complete roster meltdown, and the pressure on her shoulders just got absolutely crushing. The franchise has made it crystal clear that everything revolves around her success, but now she's watching key teammates walk away right when the team was supposed to make its championship push. But here's what nobody's talking about. Clark's injury last season played a huge role in creating this mess. When she went down, Mitchell stepped up and had the best stretch of her career, proving she could be a legitimate #1 option. That taste of stardom apparently made it impossible for Mitchell to go back to being a supporting player. The front office is now designing the entire offseason program around Clark's development and health. They're bringing in specialized shooting coaches, implementing new motion sensor technology to improve her release speed, and creating personalized recovery programs. Not only that, but they're planning to reduce her defensive responsibilities by finding veterans who can guard elite scorers. Clark's global marketability is also driving the team's strategy in ways that go far beyond basketball. The Fever are positioning themselves for international opportunities, including potential exhibition games in Asia and partnerships with overseas leagues. Here's the crazy part. They're basically building their entire brand around one player, which is either genius or completely insane. The young superstar is getting a voice in personnel decisions now, something Cox confirmed when she said leaders get involved in everything. Clark has earned that seat at the table by literally saving the WNBA's television ratings and selling out arenas across the league. But here's where it gets really interesting. Having input on roster moves means she's partially responsible if this rebuild fails. Clark's relationship with departing players adds another layer of complexity to this situation. She and Mitchell seem to have good chemistry on the court, but behind the scenes, there were apparently tensions about shot distribution and offensive roles. Cunningham's departure is equally telling about how veterans view playing alongside such a dominant young star. Let's think about this from Clark's perspective. She's being asked to carry a franchise while watching established players leave because they don't want to play in her shadow. That's an enormous amount of pressure for someone who's still early in her career, and it could backfire spectacularly if the wrong veterans get brought in. The medical staff is treating Clark's long-term health as the franchise's most valuable asset. They're not rushing her back from injury and are designing strength programs specifically to handle the physical demands of being double-teamed every night. But here's the concerning reality. If Clark gets hurt again, this entire rebuild strategy falls apart. Clark's shooting efficiency improvements are becoming the focal point of the offseason program. The team is investing in technology to to eliminate wasted motion from her shot, allowing her to score more effectively when defenses collapse on her. Now, here's what makes this absolutely crucial. Her ability to space the floor determines whether Boston can dominate in the paint. The pressure on Clark to approve roster moves and validate the front office's decisions is creating a situation where her basketball judgment will be tested as much as her playing ability. The financial implications of losing Cunningham and Mitchell are absolutely staggering for the Fever's championship timeline. Cox had budgeted for re-signing both players as part of an aggressive spending strategy, but now that money is sitting there with nowhere to go and limited options to spend it on. But here's where things get really desperate. The Fever are now throwing money at international prospects they've barely scouted. Cox admitted they're watching European and Asian leagues more aggressively than ever, basically gambling on overseas talent because the domestic free agent pool got decimated by their roster exodus. The ownership group is panicking behind the scenes, even though they're publicly supporting Cox's rebuild plan. They invested heavily in infrastructure, charter flights, and recovery technology, expecting to compete for championships immediately. Not only that, but they're watching their marketing opportunities disappear as key players walk away from what was supposed to be a breakout season. Mitchell's departure alone cost them millions in potential merchandise sales and local sponsorship deals. She was becoming a fan favorite and had strong connections with the Indianapolis community. Here's what makes this even more painful. Losing her means losing the perfect complement to Clark's playing style, something that can't be easily replaced with available free agents. The international scouting expansion is costing serious money, with scouts traveling to multiple continents looking for players who can immediately contribute. Cox is basically building a global recruiting network overnight, hoping to find diamonds in the rough who can step into championship level roles. But here's the reality check. Overseas players often struggle with the physicality and pace of the WNBA. Cunningham's exit eliminated their most reliable three-point threat outside of Clark, forcing the front office to prioritize shooters in free agency. The problem is that proven shooters who can also defend are expensive and rare, especially ones willing to play supporting roles on a young team. Let's talk about the real financial disaster here. The Fever are now paying premium prices for replacement players while getting nothing in return for the departing talent. They can't trade players who already left, so they're absorbing dead money while scrambling to fill roster spots. The team's global marketing strategy is also taking a massive hit. They had planned to use Mitchell and Cunningham in international promotional events, leveraging their experience and veteran leadership. Now here's what's absolutely crushing. They're trying to build a global brand around essentially 3 players, which puts enormous pressure on Clark and Boston to carry the entire marketing load. Cox is also dealing with charter flight costs and travel logistics that were planned around a full roster. The team committed to better travel accommodations as part of their championship push, but now they're paying for empty seats while trying to recruit new players to fill them. The investment in player development technology and specialized coaching staff was designed for a specific group of players. But here's the twist. Much of that investment is now wasted because the players it was designed for are gone, leaving the Fever with expensive programs and nobody to use them on. The Fever's championship window just got slammed shut before it even opened, and the franchise is staring at a complete identity crisis. What was supposed to be the most important offseason in team history has turned into a desperate salvage operation, with Cox trying to convince everyone that losing half the roster was somehow part of the plan. But here's the brutal truth. This roster exodus exposes fundamental problems with how the organization handles veteran players and manages expectations. You don't lose 2 key rotation players in one offseason unless there are serious cultural issues that go way beyond basketball decisions. The dynasty plans that Cox was bragging about just a few months ago now look completely ridiculous. Building a championship team requires chemistry, experience, and continuity. 3 things the Fever just threw away when they let Cunningham and Mitchell walk. Not only that, but they're asking Clark and Boston to essentially start over with completely new teammates. Cox is now scrambling to find players who can immediately step into championship roles. But here's the problem. Those players usually want to join teams that already look ready to win. The Fever just proved they can't keep their own players happy, so why would established veterans want to sign there? Here's what makes this situation absolutely catastrophic. The WNBA's competitive balance means there are maybe 3 or 4 legitimate championship contenders each season. The Fever just dropped themselves out of that conversation by losing 2 players who understood their system and could contribute immediately. The coaching staff is also dealing with the reality reality that their offensive schemes were built around specific players who are now gone. White has to completely redesign her approach while hoping that whoever Cox signs can learn the system quickly enough to compete at a high level. Let's be completely honest about what this means. The Fever are no longer building a championship team around Clark and Boston. They're building a development team that might be ready to compete in 2 or 3 years, assuming they can actually keep players happy and create a stable culture. The pressure on Clark to single-handedly carry this franchise just became completely unrealistic. She's being asked to be the face of the league, the cornerstone of a rebuild, and the primary reason veterans should want to play in Indiana. But here's the reality. Even the best players need help, and the Fever just made Clark's job infinitely harder. Cox's international scouting strategy might pay off eventually, but championship teams aren't built on hope and overseas prospects. They're built on proven players who can perform in crucial moments, and the Fever just lost 2 of those players for absolutely nothing. Now here's the final devastating blow. If this rebuild fails, Clark and Boston will start looking at other options. The Fever have maybe 2 seasons to prove they can build a winner, or they risk losing everything they've worked for. The franchise that was supposed to become the next great WNBA dynasty just became a cautionary tale about roster management and player relations. If you enjoyed this breakdown of the Fever's complete organizational meltdown and want to stay updated on more WNBA drama, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which team you think will benefit most from Indiana's disaster.